with Islamic faith, so how dare they want to do that? So we tend to profile that. When you get on an airplane and you see a bunch of people wearing turbans and all that kind of stuff, and they're kind of huddled together, and you kind of look at what's going on here. I mean, you naturally do that. I mean, when I got on an airplane after 9/11, 2 weeks to fly out to my friend's memorial service at the Pentagon, I was a little nervous about getting on an airplane because it was fresh on the heels of people taking over aircraft and flying them into buildings or into farm fields in western Pennsylvania. And it's kind of like, you ever see the movie Jaws?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was pretty young when the Jaws movie first came out, it so terrified me because I was young. And I think it's what I was 14 or 15. I was so young when that movie came out that I was even afraid to go jump in Table Rock Lake because, you know, there's not too many sharks in Table Rock Lake, but you just kind of dive in, all of a sudden you hear that shark music. And you just kind of make it back to shore real quick. So it's kind of the same thing about flying after 9/11. You're kind of a little nervous about it. But I digress. Strict scrutiny test. The government must show that differential treatment is necessary. In other words, if they're going to block, like back in the 1960s, in the case of Loving versus Virginia, if the government's going to intervene and try to block a marriage between two races, then they have to show, they have to have strict scrutiny, that they're doing it because the public is in danger. It's going to cause riot and unrest. And so basically that was overturned because they could not prove that that relationship was going to be a threat to society. So heightened security, or excuse me, heightened scrutiny, or the intermediate scrutiny test, is basically sex-based discrimination. The author's a little bit behind time on women in combat. Yeah, women are not going to be infantry officers, because infantry tends to be on the forward edge of the battlefield. They're not going to be armor officers out there in tanks fighting tank battles. But we all know that that's based on the old concept of what the battlefield looked like. Here's the front edge of the battlefield. Here's the enemy. Here are the good guys. The cav, the scouts, the infantry, the armor are all up here fighting each other, killing the bad guys on the other side. The combat service, the combat support, the artillery, and the combat service support, ordnance, transportation, quartermaster are all in the back. And oh, by the way, that's where we want our women, because they're not going to be in harm's way, as likely to be in harm's way up here on the front edge of the battlefield. So it's all right for women to be in the army or in the military, but they have to be in one of these branches back here that's behind where all the fighting's taking place. We don't want our women up here as infantry officers or armor officers or cav officers or whatever the case may be. That's not what the battlefield looks like anymore. This is what the battlefield looked like in the 20th century, but this is what the battlefield looks like now. Everybody is on the front line. Everybody. Women are getting killed over the last 10, 11 years. Pardon me?
In combat all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't know where the front line is because there is no front line. Everywhere is the front line. And so we're going to be rethinking that. Just by the way, yesterday, don't ask, don't tell. That's a big difference. I don't know where I got that. Don't ask, don't tell is now no longer policy. You can serve openly as gay in the military. And believe me, as soon as that policy was repealed, you've seen all these people. You've seen a Navy lieutenant getting married to his partner openly. You see all these different expressions of love taking place that were not previously permitted. So the floodgates are up. You have some people that were previously discharged from the military for being gay, and now they're wanting to get back into the military. So our values, our principles as a nation, we basically have said that, yeah, that's fine with us to have gays openly serving in the military. What do you think about that? Guess what? This is late breaking news, I know. But there have always been homosexuals in our society. There's always been homosexuals in our, going back, way back. Why has it always been kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod secret that there are homosexuals in society, but we don't want them to sort of openly? I'm not advocating for or against, I'm just trying to be argumentative.
Religious values?
Religious values, who we are from a religious standpoint? Very much so. What about from a value-based perspective as far as what is right and what is wrong? Pardon me?
It's not seen as a norm.
It's not seen as being normal, a normal relationship.
If it was the other way around somehow, if there was a majority difference, then it would be a totally different subject. But they won't ever, for survival, they won't ever do that. But maybe in certain places, in certain areas, that's how to say.
Too touchy to talk about, isn't it? It really is. Some people don't feel comfortable talking about this. But some of you have very strong feelings, one way or the other, and you need to be aware of why you have those feelings. And what do you want to do as far as being involved in areas of public policy with regarding that topic? And your feeling on that is none of my business. That's what makes this country so wonderful. So, something to think about. I know it's a tough one to talk about. Ordinary scrutiny is a rational man model. What makes sense? And that's usually where a lot of states come into play about what makes sense for its demographic, for its homogeneous population. You know, the more you get to the state level and local level, you're talking about groups of people that have far more in common with one another than if you're talking about Texans versus people who live in Massachusetts. I mean, there's going to be a disparity a little bit on those two groups of people, right? There's going to be more heterogeneous, in fact. But when you get down to southwest Missouri, down in Joplin, we tend to be identified as being Bible builders, a very conservative area of the United States.
Country music redneck.
Pardon me?
Country music listening rednecks.
Country music rednecks, or whatever the case may be. So state laws for driver, then we talk about what do we want for our society in our states. We want our people to be of a certain age before they get a driver's license. Because of our high incident of traffic accidents for younger people, we think in Missouri we ought to have a graduated licensing process for people who are driving. Learner's permit, intermediate driver, and then we go to full driver license. We hope that that will save lives, but we want to be able to determine that based on rational thoughts for Missouri. What's right for Missouri? Drinking. When should someone be able to buy alcohol? Some people always make the argument, if I'm old enough to die for my country, I ought to be old enough to go purchase a beer. So a lot of people can't buy liquor until they're 21, or legally consume liquor until they're 21. But you can put on an army uniform and go fight a war when you're 18, or whatever. So, but we make the decision for what we think is appropriate at the state level or local level based on a rational scrutiny process. So anything else on that topic? You understand the 3 levels of scrutiny on when the government can discriminate? Obviously, you're talking about age discrimination when you're talking about determining when somebody can get a driver's license. You're talking about age discrimination when you're talking about when people can purchase alcohol. But the government is doing it for rational purposes. They're discriminating against a group of people rationally. That's what these arguments are all about.
The age discrimination on driver's license, they're also trying to make it, you have to, when you're older, you have to pass certain tests to still keep your driver's license.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it's,
right.
They get you coming angle.
I mean, it was a heartbreaker. I ran in the license office for 4 years. Actually, I paid a bunch of people to run my license office. I just owned it. But sometimes I'd go in there and empty out the baskets and sign the front of the check so they could get paid. But sometimes I'd go work the driver's license counter. And there were some heartbreaking situations where you have an older male or older woman coming in with their adult children, and they're standing behind their mom and dad, who's 80 or whatever, and they're trying to say, they want them to get rid. They want me to be the bearer of bad news. I'm sorry, you don't qualify for your driver's license anymore, because they don't want to take it away from them because that'll be too emotional within the family. So they come to the driver's license office hoping that I will fail them in their driver's test or for eye test and things like that. Slavery and its aftermath, slavery in the United States, opposition to slavery, the Civil War era. I will tell you, just as a friendly reminder, that slavery was the elephant in the room in our Constitutional Convention and before, and it remained the elephant in the room when we went into our Congress, when we had northern states in collaboration with southern states in our U.S. Congress in New York, Philadelphia, and then where we're at now in Washington. And there was a lot of tension between the northern states and the southern states. It all centered around, I don't care how people bracket it. I don't care how people talk about it. Well, it was a states' rights issue, malarkey. It was a states' rights issue with one topic, slavery. That was the states' rights issue. I mean, what other states' rights issue was so controversial but slavery? There wasn't any. I mean, it had to do with maybe the planter class, the farming class versus the mercantilist and the rich banker class from a social class standpoint. But the elephant in the room was always slavery with regard to states' rights. That's what we went to war over. I don't care how anybody else says it. We went to war because of states' rights. It wasn't just slavery. Okay, let's take slavery out of the discussion. Why did we go to war? Slavery. Still there. So that's why we went to war. The decisions made by the Supreme Court did not help matters any. We started really formally with the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and the Missouri Compromise had to do with admitting a slave state and a free state together. Early on in our republic, we would admit states to the Union in pairs. And it came to the point where, I didn't get very far in this discussion today, but we're doing all right. It came to the point where Missouri wanted to be admitted as a slave state. And the Congress had already said, we're not going to allow slavery to move any further west than a certain point. And we're not going to allow slavery to move any further north at a certain point. But we're going to compromise with Missouri this one last time. And we're going to allow Missouri to enter. Here's Illinois, here's Arkansas, obviously Tennessee, Mississippi, etc. So we're going to allow Missouri to enter, but Maine is going to enter. It's going to break off of Massachusetts, and Maine's going to enter as a free state. So that was the Missouri Compromise. But no more. But no more. That was basically very controversial back in 1820. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the Dred Scott decision and Plessy versus Ferguson on how ugly things were in the Supreme Court on Friday. See you then.